Survivor madness, pre-game injuries, in-game injuries, madness all over the place. Week 2 reactions coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Jeff Erickson. He's Nick Whalen. We are reacting to week 2, and what a wild week 2. Nick, I'm in a survivor pool that is over after 2 weeks. 2 weeks and it's over. Last week, the Bengals crushed people. This week, the Ravens, the Cowboys, the Lions, all lost. Wild reactions there. We don't know anything, apparently.
Apparently not, man. And you know, you're not alone, certainly, if you took Cincinnati or you took the Baltimore Ravens this week. Obviously, we follow the Circus Survivor contest very closely here at RotoWire. And last week, I think we lost, like 34% of entries on Cincinnati. 26% went out with the Baltimore Ravens this week. So well over half of the field already wiped out now in Circus Survivor. Implied value of that $1,000 entry has essentially tripled. That's one way to look at it. The next most popular picks, though, actually ended up doing okay. The Texans, of course, pull off a win last night, although thanks to our good pal Cam Akers, did not cover that game. Thank you, Mr. Akers, for fumbling at the 3-yard line and ruining my best bet of the week. Oh, no. Chargers, they were a safe play. Obviously, Detroit, they went out. That was about 10% of the field as well. So just carnage all over the place. And, one of the big things I struggled with, Jeff, with my staff picks and with my picks article was I knew I liked too many favorites this week, but I couldn't talk myself into a handful of teams, specifically Cincinnati. It's just like, man, I know the trend with the Bengals, but I just can't quite see them winning that game. You look at the Ravens and the Raiders, you're like, how does Baltimore not win that game by at least 10? Underdogs right now heading into Monday Night Football are 11-4 ATS.
Wow, that is crazy. And I made the Ravens my best bet. I thought, they're going to smash the Raiders.
Well, they were for a while. I mean, they held the Raiders, under 50 yards of total offense in the first half.
Yeah. But you know what? The Ravens offense isn't quite clicking. I think that's one of the big takeaways. And let's start talking Ravens Raiders here, because I mean, there's so many things that we could lead off with there, but since we started on the survivor kick, let's start off there. I mean, the Ravens are just not, they're just not firing on all cylinders there. Lamar had some struggles late in the game. They didn't put away this Raiders team. Bateman had a juggle that turned into an interception. Again, Bateman, it seems like he comes up small in the, in some very moments there. He had a big catch against the Chiefs the week before, but that juggle / interception was huge in that game.
That was massive. It was massive. I was talking to our guy, John McKechnie, yesterday, kind of texting him, asking his thoughts on the Baltimore Ravens. And that was the first thing he brought up was, there are other issues, certainly, but when you have a play like that, not only a big drop, but a drop that turns into a game-changing turnover. It's like we see this, it feels like 2 or 3 times every year with the Baltimore Ravens, who, continue to just blow these double-digit leads. I mean, this is their 4th loss after leading by double digits in the 4th quarter over the last season and an 8th. We're 2 games into this year, plus all of last season. I mean, this has been a trend for the Baltimore Ravens, who are all of a sudden in a very dangerous spot. Obviously, they're 0-2 right now. They play at the Dallas Cowboys next week. They get the Buffalo Bills at home in week 4, then at Cincinnati in week 5, Washington week 6. That's a winnable game. But then at Tampa Bay. I mean, this is a really, really dangerous stretch for the Ravens, where it already feels like they're on thin ice in the AFC, thin ice in their own division. Like I mentioned, Vegas had 48 yards of offense at the half, 4 rushing yards in the first half. So the Ravens defense, for the most part, did its job early on. But like you said, the offense is it's not fully clicking, right? We saw more Derrick Henry, 18 carries for 84 yards and a touchdown. You'll take that for fantasy purposes. Zay Flowers got his season turned around after a quiet week 1, but still not a ton for Mark Andrews. It was better than last week, 4 for 51 on 5 targets. Huge regression, of course, for Isaiah Likely. Huge regression for Justice Hill as well. 2 guys who were key for the Ravens in week 1. But yeah, I mean, there were 2 times in the second half where you're like, all right, if Baltimore can either get a stop or get a score here, this game is essentially over. And they were unable to do it. And it seemed inconceivable that they would lose this game straight up. But man, some key penalties against the Ravens, some lapses, a little too much Lamar Jackson having to put this team on his back for the second straight week. I'm shocked that this team is 0-2.
Yeah, me too. And granted, the thing is, I think in both the case of the Ravens and the Bengals, which we'll talk about later, but 1-1 seems like a likely outcome for the first 2 weeks. At Kansas City, they both had that, but
Yeah.
the other is the part that was kind of scary there. That quickly on the Raiders side things. Brock Bowers looked really good. They've got him and Adams now. They have two real targets, and Jacoby Myers is kind of his ice, kind of pushed to the side in this one here, but he can play a little too. So, they Minshew threw a lot of passes, a lot of short ones, but enough that it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Brock Bowers was tight end 2 in PPR on the week, behind only George Kittle. He's tight end 2 in PPR on the year, behind only Isaiah Likely. I mean, you could argue through 2 weeks, he's been the most consistent tight end in the NFL, and I don't see that changing. He played only 43 of 63 snaps. He was still nursing that foot injury a little bit. You do wonder if maybe there could be an increase in snaps coming as he gets healthier. 9 targets, though, on 28 routes. I mean, 32% of the time he's running a route, he was being targeted by Gardner Minshew, caught all 9 of those targets for 98 yards. And the Raiders only ran 15 plays out of 12 personnel, essentially meaning Bowers was on the field with Michael Mayer. So he's still kind of rotating with Mayer a bit more than you think. And again, I think as he gets healthier and continues to grow, we see that share go even more in favor of Brock Bowers. Last thing I'll say on this game, we saw more Zamir White this week. He wasn't very effective, but we at least saw a heavier snap share for Zamir White, a lot less Alexander Madison. Really just a situation that I want to avoid.
Exactly. Some people took the Cowboys as a survivor option this week. They still haven't stopped the Saints once, Nick. Not once did they stop them. Insane. How are the Saints really that good? Is it really the Kincaid offense here? Is this really a thing there? Is this? I'm floored by how good efficient the Saints have been.
Yeah, 6 straight touchdowns to open this game for the New Orleans Saints, who, let up a couple of big scores in the first half too. Like for a while, it looked like, all right, maybe Dallas is going to be able to keep pace. They had the long one to CeeDee Lamb that kept it to a 1-score game early on, but just, could not stop the Saints. I mean, this is back-to-back weeks with 40 plus for the New Orleans Saints to open the year. And I think a lot of people saw last week against Carolina and said, all right, well, it's the Panthers. A lot of teams could do that, but I think we're officially on, Clint Kubiak as a next head coach type of watch, right? I mean, this offense looks completely different. You just look at the motion rates, right? I mean, they're leading the NFL, lapping the field right now in terms of motion. That's something you usually think of with a team like Miami. It's certainly not something that was associated with the Saints offense a year ago. And, I think part of the reason that everybody was just kind of, I wouldn't say down on the Saints, but, nobody had any thoughts. It was just like, well, you're running it back, new offensive coordinator. We'll see how it works. I mean, this is as big of a year-over-year difference you could see with a coordinator when you're essentially bringing back the same personnel. Obviously, it was a huge fantasy day for Alvin Kamara. Interesting that we saw 0 targets for Foster Moreau and Juwan Johnson after both of those guys finished as top 5 tight ends last week. We knew that was fluky. We knew that was going to regress, but good to see that confirmation. Taysom Hill, by the way, did end up going to the hospital after this game with a chest injury. Saints are downplaying it. Still could be something that causes him to miss a week or two. So something to keep an eye on there. Chris Olave, kind of a frustrating week again for him. Like you see 47 points on the board last week. You see 44 points on the board this week. And, Olave was better than he was in week 1, 4 for 81, was tackled at the 1-yard line on what could have been a touchdown. I still think, you got to be encouraged overall. Like when the Saints are putting up, this kind of offense back-to-back weeks, eventually it's going to funnel down to Chris Olave. Just kind of bad luck on his part through 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Juwan Johnson. That was my pickup in the NFFC primetime where I lost Jake Ferguson, and I also cut Luke Musgrave because he was getting no snaps for the Packers. So, okay, I need to find a tight end this week. So I get a guy with 0 targets. That was fun. Can't. But they put up 44 points. They're not idiots. Can't complain about it. They just didn't go to him this week. His number didn't come up. The other big one, other survivor carnage one was the Lions losing to the Bucs. The Bucs are a good team, and I've been on this I kind of was on this hill already. I'm going to take a little credit on the Bucs, giving the credit for the Bucs
as you should.
But it was kind of a weird game because a lot of this production was done early in this one, especially from the passing game. Chris Godwin got all of his early. I was on Mike Evans. He did nothing in this game. The Bucs had major injuries in this game too. No Antoine Winfield in this game. Still found a way to win.
Yeah, one more quick note, by the way, on Dallas. Just I want to get
Okay,
this
sorry.
in fantasy wise. Luke Schoonmaker, if Jake Ferguson misses more time, I think he's a reasonable streamer. Caught all
I
6 of
agree.
his targets. Was a second round pick last year as well. It's not like this is just some random dude that they threw in there with Jake Ferguson out. So it still was not it was not a great week for tight ends overall. If you're hurting in that area, if you have Evan Engram and he's out next week, again, if Ferguson is out, I think Luke Schoonmaker makes some sense as a pickup. But on Bucs Lions, I mean, it was such a fun game to watch. I thought it would be a lot more high scoring. I thought Tampa Bay would be hurt a lot more by all the injuries in the defensive backfield. And that's ultimately why I was really on the Detroit Lions. But it mattered, when you look at when you look at the numbers for this game, like the Lions absolutely dominated from a yardage perspective, from a time of possession perspective. They ran 83 plays to 47 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Lions had 463 yards of offense compared to 216 for Tampa Bay. Jared Goff took 0 sacks on the day. Baker Mayfield took 5. 4.5 of those went to Aiden Hutchinson. And yet Detroit had the 2 killer picks from Jared Goff. The first one especially was horrific. They went 1 of 7 in the red zone. 1 of 7. And I thought Detroit just got away from its identity, especially late in this game. They're driving down 4. They essentially, get the ball down to about the 20-yard line and ran 3 straight passes with 3 timeouts. Like, I know it's late in the game. You don't necessarily want to run clock, but you have all 3 timeouts. And
Right.
you just think back to last week against the Rams, and it's like, man, how did Detroit end up winning that game? It was David Montgomery and it was Jahmyr Gibbs on the ground. And I know Tampa Bay is a much better defense and it's a tougher defense to run against, but I thought Detroit just kind of lost its identity in the second half. And they had chance after chance to take control of this game and just couldn't do it. Big week for Chris Godwin, by the way. He was one of my big hits in terms of the player props this week. Loved Chris Godwin. He so far through 2 weeks has 15 catches on 16 targets. He caught 7 of 8 for 117 and a long score this week. We saw Amon-Ra St. Brown. He got banged up. Sounds like it's nothing too major, but he had 11 catches on 19 targets. You like to see that. A little bit of concern, though, for Sam Laporta. Just 2 for 13 on 3 targets. If you drafted Sam Laporta, you're not going to punt on him after 2 weeks, but it's not really what you thought you'd see from him so far. And I think part of it is Jameson Williams taking on a bigger role in this offense.
I was just going to say that. For 2 weeks in a row now, Williams has produced. Williams came into this game banged up in his own right, yet still went 5 for 79. You'd like to see that. He even had a carry for 15 yards again. That's another part of that. It's 2 weeks in a row where he's had a big run. And they're finding good ways to get him involved. I like that a lot. But yeah, Laporta and Jim Coventry was. I'm going to tout Jim Coventry twice in this one game because he was on Chris Godwin because he said, hey, running through this, playing through the slot. There are probably others to point out, but Jim was all over that. And he was all over like, hey, I'm not as high on Laporta as the crowd because, it was so much touchdown dependent in terms of production last year. It wasn't the volume people thought he had. And here we go after a couple of weeks, and it's been pretty light volume. Keep in mind, too, Laporta was hurt in the preseason and training camp. And I think maybe there's something to that a little bit there. The Lions are really tight with their injury information, which is going to be another topic we're going to hit here in a second here, because I really do think. But yeah, Detroit put up over 400 yards of offense. They should have had more than 16 points, too.
Right. Well, and Sam Laporta played 75 snaps, so it's not like he's really being limited from a workload perspective. He's just not getting the look so far from Jared Goff. A couple other notes here before we move on. Bucky Irving played about a third of the snaps, actually exactly 1/3 of the snaps behind Rachaad White. Had 7 carries compared to 10 for White. Neither was overly effective. We kind of knew Tampa Bay wouldn't be able to run the ball in this game. That was 100% the case. Rachaad White gave you like 3.5 fantasy points this week. Didn't do anything as a pass catcher. And then on the Detroit side, not a ton of fantasy impact here, but Tim Patrick did make his debut, elevated from the practice squad, ended up playing 33 snaps. So somebody who is going to have a role for Detroit.
Yeah, he is. And they've been kind of looking for that other receiver there to help. Injuries have played a big role, including pregame injury notes. We're going to talk about that in a second. But first, got a quick note from our friends at Underdog. We're proud to partner with Underdog for the NFL season. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and it's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. In addition to their popular best ball contest, Underdog also offers great DFS pick'em games. Pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. You can win up to 1,000 times your money in a single night by picking between 2 and 8 players to build a pick'em entry. I look at tonight's game with the Eagles and the Falcons. I'm big on Devonta Smith. And so you can check their projection. Go with a higher stat total on that projection. Sign up with RWNFL to claim your free pick plus a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with my promo code RWNFL to claim your free pick plus a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Alabama, New England, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. That's 1-800-639-8783. Or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 HOPE line at 1-878-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. That's 467-369. All right, big thanks to Underdog. Appreciate them. We'll be talking plenty about that over the course of the season. Nick, we were talking in the preseason. We didn't have those major injuries. We didn't have these big things happening. Now, regular season, we've had McCaffrey and all that happened with that. We had two, for the second week in a row, we had a big surprise. We had AJ Brown getting ruled out and Evan Engram injuring himself in pregame warmups. Credit to the Eagles, at least, for letting us know before the Sunday games kicked off about the Monday night absence there.
Yeah, I do wonder if that was influenced at all by the 49ers last week, right? Just, hey, we don't want to put ourselves in a bad situation. We don't want to put any players in a bad situation. So yeah, I mean, it was a little bit striking to see that news, come out when it did, but from a fantasy perspective, we love it. But yeah, it was a rough week for injuries. I mean, you named a couple of them. Justin Jefferson ended up getting banged up. Sounds like he's going to be okay, according to him, but still something to monitor. On the defensive side, DeForest Buckner is going to miss some time for the Colts. That's a big one. There's been some whispers that Kenneth Walker can end up missing more time beyond this past week. Obviously, we saw Joe Mixon get banged up last night on a hip drop tackle. I don't know that it's anything overly serious. You were initially worried about the Achilles, the way that the leg of the defender came down right on his Achilles, but Mixon was able to walk off the field. We'll get more info on him in the next day or two. And then two really big ones. Isaiah Pacheco, I mean, he's going to miss extended time. I think it's going to be Carson Steele waiver wire week, and we'll see what Kansas City does to bolster that backfield. They got to bring somebody else in, you would think, especially with CEH, unavailable right now. And then, of course, Cooper Kupp, who exited early on for the LA Rams.
Yeah,
Jeff, I had a great fantasy week. One of the best weeks I've had in a while. I have Cooper Kupp in so many leagues that this might be the high point for me on the year.
Oh no.
Yeah,
and that happened early too, unfortunately.
It did.
That was a real rough one. And yeah, it didn't look good. And Nakua's, and the news on Nakua keeps on getting worse too. With Puka Nakua's, they're talking 5 to 7 weeks now.
Yeah. Let's just talk Rams Cardinals here. This is a good seg into that. And look, man, I think the Rams might be cooked. Like this might be a lost season for the Rams. Like if Cooper Kupp ends up missing real time here, I don't know how they dig their way out of this. They play, San Francisco next week. That's the Niners coming off of a loss. I think they will have a very good chance to start the season 0-3. We know the stats as far as teams that start 0-3 and make the playoffs. It doesn't happen very often. I mean, this defense looks terrible. The offensive line looks terrible. They felt like they were kind of in desperation mode right away in this game. They came out, went for a 4th down for some reason on their first drive of the game, got stuffed. And that was pretty much it. I mean, the floodgates were just opened at that point. Kupp goes out on the next possession. Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about the Rams. We knew they were on thin ice. We knew it was a top-heavy roster. You knew what you were signing up for if you drafted Cooper Kupp and even Nakua to some degree, given the injury coming into the year. But I mean, this has been worst case scenario, right? I mean, again, when you draft Cooper Kupp, you're thinking, all right, at some point I'm going to be dealing, with an injury here. He's going to be day to day. He's going to be week to week. I mean, we're 1 1/8 games into the season, he's already injured. Puka Nacua goes out in the first half of the first game. I'm intrigued by Demarcus Robinson. Tyler Johnson, I guess, looked good in week 1. These guys, you can't replace that level of a receiver duo in Kupp and Nacua. I will say, though, somebody to monitor, especially in deeper leagues, Jordan Whittington, who turned a lot of heads in the preseason, looked great in the preseason, played every snap in the second half of this game against Arizona once Cooper Kupp was out of the game. So I think he is somebody to monitor if you're trying to salvage something fantasy wise with the Rams. And of course that will require, Cooper Kupp missing time. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, Cooper Kupp got hurt in the first quarter. He still had 6 targets. They were running everything through him.
Right.
And that's the thing. It's so devastating for this team too. They have a bad offensive line. This is almost like the scenario we were picturing last year. That they're so thin, and that we're fading the Rams. Now we're like, oh, the Rams are, McVay's a genius, so he'll overcome it there. They lost a big safety in John Johnson with a shoulder injury there. He didn't return. Meanwhile, we got to talk Marvin Harrison Jr. Still only 8 targets. I'd like to see more, but then again, it was a blowout. Second half, they didn't need him. He made his mark early. The play that caught my eye wasn't the 2 scoring plays, which were both amazing. Those caught my eye too, but the one where he got behind the safety on the scramble drill too. That's just the way he kind of freed himself. That is really impressive to me.
Yeah, huge bounce back for Harrison. There was a lot of concern over what he looked like in week 1, not just the lack of attention from Kyler Murray, but some of the speed metrics were way down. Turns out that was a massive overreaction. I do a kind of reckless predictions video every week, Jeff, for our YouTube channel. And one of my predictions is that Marvin Harrison would struggle again this week. That was out the window, like literally 4 minutes into this game. Incredible catch in the back of the end zone by Harrison, able to get his knee and his feet down. And really, from then on, the route was on for Arizona. So great to see Marvin Harrison bounce back. Trey McBride had himself a nice week, 6 for 67, caught all 6 of his targets. Recovered a fumble for a touchdown as well. It was not a receiving touchdown if you were not watching this game, but he did get credit for diving on a ball after a James Conner fumble in the end zone. Really not a whole lot to say from this game. It was over. It was over midway through the second quarter, but I thought Kyler Murray looked incredible. And he's been, he was great last week against Buffalo as well, keeping them in that game. This was an all-time performance by Kyler Murray. Only threw the ball 21 times because of the game script, but some of the off-schedule throws, getting out of the pocket, shedding tackles, rolling left, whipping a ball to the back of the end zone. That touchdown, both touchdowns to Harrison were incredible throws, and then the one to Higgins as well. I thought Kyler, if you started him in DFS last week, if he was somebody that you took as QB8, QB9, I think you got to be really thrilled with how this offense looks.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just, can they give Murray the time and let him do his thing, let him cook? And it sure seems like it so far. Running game, Connor looks great. Trey Benson hasn't looked so great so far. And Connor is obviously, we saw it last year with and without James Conner too, and how good that team looks. Yeah, and Connor, he could have had a monster fantasy day, but for that fumble. But still, 21 for 122 and a touch. You'll still take that.
Yeah. And you look at Trey Benson, it's like 11 carries for 10 yards. A lot of that came in the second half when it was just obvious running situation. So I don't really hold that against him.
Yeah. A lot of people, Adam says there's a league out there that when AJ Brown, Cup, Pacheco, Walker, Higgins, and all that, many AJ Brown, Puka Nacua turns. I'm sure of that. You just look at the ADPs, someone's got that combo this week, and like, but so it goes. So we referred to Isaiah Pacheco. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's talk Bengals Chiefs. I'm strangely okay with, I hated how, obviously I hated how the game ended.
Yeah.
I liked how the Bengals played. There's some points left out there, but they played well. They played really well in this game. I thought, and I thought this season would start off 1-1. It's 0-2 now. I don't like seeing Jamar Chase lose his mind. And that cost them a drive. But this is a team. It was this close. And, I think the Bengals may have had some major injuries on their defensive line. We'll see about that. But I came out of this game strangely optimistic.
I think that's fair. What I have in my notes is that this was just a classic Bengals Chiefs game in every sense of the word, right? Yep. It's like not only did the Bengals always seem to play well against Kansas City, but Kansas City always seems to make mistakes that they don't typically make against Cincinnati. 3 huge turnovers for the Chiefs, 2 uncharacteristic picks from Patrick Mahomes. One of those was just a ridiculous play by the corner on a deep ball to Xavier Worthy. Yep. Yeah, that was, that's the catch of the year so far, receiver or defender. And then, of course, the Carson Steele fumble, was huge in the first half, but it was Cincinnati that committed the biggest turnover of the game on the Burrow fumble, which I thought for sure he was down at first, but I do think that was the right call. That ball was out. I thought they made a good note on the broadcast saying that, Burrow himself wasn't arguing it, right? Typically in that situation, you'll see the player, pointing at the ground saying, no, I was down. And Burrow didn't do that. He got up, he started chasing the play. I think he knew that ball was out. Another Bengals Chiefs game ends with a controversial call and a long field goal from Harrison Butker. Hate to say it, Jeff, it was the right call. Defender was there early. The Chiefs just somehow always find a way to end up on the right side.
I just hate that it was a bailout throw.
It was a total bailout, but it was the right call.
It was interference.
He hit him early.
It was a rookie play. And it was a rookie safety out there making that play, and he got called for two big plays like that in the game.
Yep.
It is what it is. It's just Kansas City always seems to get what they want. But you know what? I actually agree. It was PI. It was. I think it was. I think it was Kyle Brandt that was talking about it on Good Morning Football this morning. He's like, that was the textbook definition of pass interference.
It was.
He's right. He's absolutely right. Can't complain about it too much. You know, it's funny. I was getting on the plane right as the Bengals went ahead on the second Yoshavash touchdown there. So, that was just like, okay, you know. And then I couldn't get on the Wi-Fi right away, so I was really frustrated figuring out what's going on in this game. Obviously, I caught back and watched it after the fact, but that was frustrating. I'm a little. If you're a Jamar Chase owner, what's your level of worry right now? 4 for 35. Teams are. The broadcast kept showing double teams on him every single play.
Yeah, I'm not really too worried. I mean, I think the script for Cincinnati was, short passes, right? And they were able to get those throughout the entire game. The two longest plays went to Mike Gesicki and Jermaine Burton. The Burton one was a nice throw downfield by Burrow. But other than that, it was, really poor tackling, I thought, by the Chiefs throughout this game. Like Drew Tranquill especially had 2 or 3 missed tackles that ended up in long runs after the catch. We saw 3 different tight ends made an impact for Cincinnati between Gesicki, Eric All, and Drew Sample. That's not necessarily going to be the script every week. I think Jamar Chase will end up being fine. I thought Trent McDuffie and like you said, the scheming by Kansas City kind of took him out of this game as much as they possibly could. But with that being the case, I think you have to be encouraged with how the Cincinnati offense looked. And I thought defensively, I mean, Cincinnati really held up here. The Chiefs really made a point to pound the ground game early on, and it was working. Isaiah Pacheco, before he got hurt, was giving you about 5 yards per carry. I think if Carson Steele doesn't fumble that ball, maybe it's a different script early on. But Carson Steele is going to be a huge waiver wire guy this week. And again, I think Kansas City has to bring in some help in that backfield. So we'll see which direction they go. Last thing I'll say on this game, for one, Kansas City only had one play go for more than 16 yards, which is crazy. That was the 44-yard touchdown to Rashee Rice. So that, that backs up just how good that Bengals defense was. Yeah. Insane throw by Mahomes. And Travis Kelce, 3 targets on 59 snaps, 29 routes run for Travis Kelce, just 3 targets. I'm more worried about him than I am Jamar Chase. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I get it. I get it for sure. Interesting too. Samaje Perine he had one target. He didn't have any carries. I remember when the Chiefs snapped him up, we're like, oh, that's a great ad for his value. And he's just is kind of,
just 9 snaps. 9 snaps for him really was not a part of the game plan at all. And they went back to Carson Steele after the fumble too, right? That's the thing. Sometimes with a young player like that, making such a key error in a game like this, you'll see him, kind of end up in the doghouse. And obviously once Pacheco went down, they had no choice. But even before that, I thought it was interesting that they continued to trust Carson Steele.
Yeah, they did. So kind of, he'll be the pickup for sure. But we'll see. Like, I agree, because they're talking IR for Pacheco too.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I saw somebody, compare this. I forget who the other injury was. But this could be, an 8 to 10 week type of injury.
Yeah, I think so too. We've talked about 3 of the noteworthy 0-2 teams. I think there are 4: the Ravens, the Bengals, the Rams, and the Jaguars. We'll talk Jaguars next. But first, quick note from our friends over at Vivid Seats. NFL football is back. Gear up for the gridiron with Vivid Seats and score tickets to the biggest games of the year. Every touchdown, every tackle, and every eye-popping play of your favorite team, live and in person. And with Vivid Seats rewards, you earn perks with every single purchase. Each ticket you buy gets you closer to your reward. Just buy 10 tickets, then simply cash in your credit towards your 11th ticket purchase. It's that easy. Trust me, I've used it before. I used it this year again for an Angels game. It's super easy to use. Plus, with Vivid Seats is offering you $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase with code RotoWire. That's code RotoWire, ROTOWIRE. Just look at the stream here. You'll see how to spell it. From the upper deck to the front row, Vivid Seats has great tickets for all the 2024 games that matter to you. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats. Experience it live. All right, Nick. Evan Engram goes down in warmups with a hamstring injury. It's a big loss to the passing offense. A passing offense now for the Jaguars that hasn't looked good 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, Jags are a bad team. Very, very bad team. Bottom 3 coaching, bottom 3 play calling. I've defended Trevor Lawrence. He was terrible in the first half of this game. Made some big throws to keep them in it. late, but had a ton of overthrows. Just didn't really look like he ever settled in at any point. I think the season is close to being over, honestly, for Jacksonville. They play at Buffalo in primetime in week 3, at Houston the week after that. I mean, it feels like you split those. That's the best case, and you're sitting at 1-3. I think Doug Peterson might be the first coach fired. I really think we're getting to that point. Trevor Lawrence looked livid, I would say. Trevor Lawrence is about as even keeled as it gets, and you could tell after this game that he is not happy with how things are being run there. And he's going to be the guy that I think has influence on some decisions now with that contract in Jacksonville. Just another eminently winnable game for the Jags, in which they just played terrible football for, I would say 85% of this game. Part of it was the Browns playing much better than they did last week as well. The Jags got almost no pressure on Deshaun Watson, despite having no Jack Conklin, no Jedrick Wills again for the second straight week for Cleveland. Just a pretty embarrassing performance, I thought, by that Jacksonville defensive line. You mentioned Evan Engram hurt in warmups. Like, of course, you just kind of, once something like that happens, you know where this game is headed. They renamed the stadium Trevor Bank Field for this week. You can't do that after taking a terrible loss in week 1.
Really?
They did. It's part of a marketing campaign between Everbank and Lawrence. But on the other side, I mean, David Njoku was out for Cleveland. He's been a Jags killer. It's like, if anything, you would think, all right, Evan Engram and Njoku, maybe that offsets. It just didn't really matter. It didn't really matter. The Jags passing game was completely toothless. They did their usual like 7 plays where it's 1st and 10 and they take a 3-yard loss on a running play that gets blown up. Took an egregious safety at the end of this game where a Browns defensive tackle was double teamed by the center and the left guard and still got through and sacked Lawrence like immediately. If you're Lawrence, you got to know better and you got to get rid of that ball. But it was still just a horrific performance by this Jags offensive line. Brian Thomas Jr. didn't do anything in this game until the long catch that set up the Jaguars' only touchdown. He did play 44 snaps only compared to 53 for Christian Kirk, 57 for Gabe Davis. That's a little concerning. I think Brian Thomas is already very clearly their best option at receiver, and I hope that snap trend reverses. Christian Kirk looks terrible. He had 2 huge drops in week 1. He's looking like a big-time bust so far. Although Lawrence did overthrow him a couple of times. At least one of those would have been a big play. And then my last note here, Tank Bigsby injured early in this game on special teams. So we saw no Tank Bigsby for the Jags offense. If you're wondering why, it's because of that injury. So Dearness Johnson functioned as the RB2, and obviously we saw a lot more Travis Etienne.
I think that actually hurts the Jaguars too, because Tank looked really good last week. And he was the guy that was spelling. I don't think they trust Johnson to be that guy.
No, they didn't at all.
And Etienne needs his breaks, it looks like.
Yep.
Yeah. Kirk. I started him over like a credible option, in a league where I had, I think it was an auction league where I had some depth, and I went, I'll put Kirk in because of this late scratch to Engram over, galaxy braining it there. Very frustrating with that. That's 2 weeks in a row. Just dud of a game. So yeah, he's on my no fly list. Who's more cooked, the Rams or the Jaguars?
Probably the Rams, just because of the injuries. But I think, again, Jacksonville, bottom 5 offensive line, bottom 5 coaching staff. I think this, the definition of cooked maybe might be different. Like the Jags, they could still scratch a claw their way to 7 or 8 wins, but I don't see this team, pushing for a playoff spot.
Yeah. Another big game. We haven't really spent a whole lot of time talking about it. I think we may have alluded to it, Justin Jefferson with his injury, but huge win for the Vikings. 2-0 now, beating the Niners. They gave the Niners trouble before last year too, I believe.
They did.
Was it last year? Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, they won that game last year.
They did win. So that's twice now. Obviously a lot depends on Jefferson's health, but what's your level of belief in this Vikings team with Sam Darnold?
It's a lot higher than it was 2 weeks ago. I'll tell you that. And, this is a team that I think we looked at in week 1, much like New Orleans, and said, okay, yeah, they look really good, but it's the New York Giants. How much can you really take away from that? Now you're playing this Niners team that looked fantastic against the Jets in week 1. I mean, it's about as well as you can answer the bell. And, the Vikings play the Texans next week. That'll be another big test. They're at Green Bay in week 4. We'll see if Jordan Love is back for that one. Then it's the Jets, the Lions, and the Rams. And that Rams game, it looks a lot more winnable now than it did even 24 hours ago. So I think we have to treat the Vikings as a real team here, especially with Justin Jefferson seeming to avoid a major injury. I mean, we've been saying it all summer, man, but he's just so quarterback proof. And you got to give credit to Sam Darnold for the throw on that 97-yard touchdown. I mean, Jefferson was technically double covered, and he beat the coverage. It was a perfect throw by Darnold, and then a great job by Jefferson to kind of zigzag his way all the way to the end zone. The Vikings, I think they were in some ways lucky to win this game. I thought San Francisco, it was not a clean effort from the Niners. I didn't think they were overly well coached today. I thought they were a little bit overly aggressive early in this game. They had a block punt on their second possession. They went out on downs. The next possession, they went out on downs again. Their fourth possession of the game. And, obviously had 2 costly turnovers back to back in the second half. So I'm not that worried about San Francisco. They're one of those teams that when you see them in week 1, you're like, how is this team ever going to lose? It's like, They don't even need Christian McCaffrey. And then you're always reminded that, all right, any team could get tripped up. But the Niners were terrible on third down. They were terrible on fourth down. They still ripped off 6 yards per play. They still ran 13 more plays. They had 7 more first downs than Minnesota. This game, I think the final score, obviously you got to give credit to Minnesota here, but we saw some uncharacteristic mistakes on the San Francisco side.
Yeah. It's also short week on the road. They played the Monday night game. They had the euphoria from that. They're still, but then they had the downer of putting McCaffrey on IR.
Right.
They had a lot that went on with that. It's like you said, I think it really does illustrate how things are really close. These are professional teams. And aside from the Carolina Panthers, which we'll get to, anything can happen in a given week. It seems like there's the gap between the best team and the worst team is not that wide. And I think that's something we have to keep remembering here with that. Jordan Mason, 20 for 100. If you picked him up in Fab or you drafted in the end game, he's almost league winner status here. And credit to Mark Stope for saying that before the Monday night game last week on my Twitter timeline.
Yeah, no question. He was great. He was not the issue at all for the Niners in this game. It was more so, I thought, the Minnesota defense deserves a lot of credit, right? They gave up a lot of yards, but they got stops when they needed to. We saw there's a clip going around of, Brock Purdy telling Brian Flores, that was a hell of a scheme after the game. He was clearly flustered. The Niners just really, again, they put together a lot of good drives and they just could not finish off those drives. I think the one concern you would maybe have here is the run defense for San Francisco. I think the Niners will be fine on balance, but gave up 8.2 yards per carry to Ty Chandler. Gave up, gave up a decent amount of yards to Aaron Jones, who, by the way, got banged up in this game. That's why we ended up seeing more Ty Chandler, but they couldn't get the stops they needed, in the second half of this one. But again, Niners will be fine. Great to see Minnesota start this season 2-0. And I think, at the very least, I don't know if they make the playoffs, but this is a team that we have to take seriously. And I think a team that we have to consider one of the best coach teams in the NFL.
Yeah. Do you believe in the Vikings more or the Saints more?
Man, that's a tough question. I think I believe in the Saints more because of the division they play in. I think their path to, a 10-win season or, making the playoffs or winning their division is more gettable than Minnesota's is.
Okay. I buy that. Speaking of which, the Minnesota's in the same division as the Packers, who got a win despite starting Malik Willis. The Colts, the Colts no-showed this game. This is probably the most embarrassing, performance I've seen, especially offensively from the Colts. Really, I know it's a tough draw at Lambeau. I actually picked the Packers against the spread in this one because I didn't believe in the Colts, but oh my God, they ran like 12. I think they ran 15 plays in the first half. It was an awful no-show performance from Anthony Richardson, from the Colts as a whole.
It was like the Colts had no idea that Malik Willis was starting. It was such a bizarre game, and I was pretty heavy on the Colts side of things. My favorite player from this game was the under 41, which I thought was just a crazy number, given the two teams that we're dealing with, and obviously that hit by a mile. Right. But I was on the Colts minus 2.5. I'm not going to lie about that. Anthony Richardson was awful in this game. Through the 3 picks, one of those did come on a Hail Mary at the end, so you got to keep that in mind. Made a couple big plays late with his legs, including picking up a fourth down that like only Anthony Richardson picks up. But overall, a lot of off-target passes. He had passes getting batted down. They couldn't even get like the screen game going whatsoever. But really, I thought they got out-coached dramatically by the Green Bay Packers, and both offensively and defensively, right? Like Jonathan Taylor was ripping off 9 yards per carry in this game, and they didn't really start going to him heavy until early in the second half. He
had 12 carries.
Right.
12.
It was crazy. The snap share was low. We saw a lot of Trey Sermon in this game. We saw, Tyler Goodson mixing in. I don't really get what the Colts were trying to do there. But defensively too, it's like, what Green Bay wants to do, right? We saw it from the start. Like this did not look like the Packers offense. They're lining up with, 2 running backs or 2 tight ends in the backfield. It looked like you're watching a Navy game at times. And Josh Jacobs, it just felt like even on his quote unquote bad runs, was still getting like 3 or 4 yards. So it's like Green Bay was just never getting stuffed in the ways that you think they would. when you have such an obvious game plan, which was to, not let Malik Willis really throw the ball downfield. Now, Malik Willis made two very nice throws in this game. One, what was on an out route to Dontavian Wicks for a touchdown.
Right.
If that ball is like a foot more inside, it might have been a pick six, but it was a perfect throw by Willis. And then threw kind of a duck downfield to Romeo Doubs, but an incredible catch by Doubs to go up and grab that and set up another Green Bay score. So I was really low on Malik Willis. I thought this offense would be a disaster with him. He proved me wrong. He managed this game as well as he possibly could have. 12 of 14, obviously only 122 yards, but did exactly what he needed to do, which was not commit any Will Levis type of turnovers.
God, we're going to get to that. Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny you mentioned that because I think Green Bay looked at the tape of Malik Willis at Tennessee when they played Houston. Remember they played Houston on a road game and Derrick Henry ran it like 35 times. Willis threw it like 10 times. Yep. They just ripped it from that that trade book, and it worked. My other note on this one here is, you're talking about the coaching decisions. Right at the end of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter, Colts beat writers pointing this out too. 3rd and 1, Taylor is ripping them, ripping the Packers. They have I think it was the first play of the fourth quarter. Taylor's on the bench for this play. It's a key play in the game. They run the read option with to Sermon, who loses like 5 yards, bobbles the pitch, I think.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
I don't know. It was bizarre. It was really, really bizarre. I don't know if, Jonathan Taylor got banged up. It almost felt like that's how they were operating. It was like almost like he was on like a pitch count in the second half. And I know that exact read option play that you're talking about, Richardson should have kept that. He keeps that and he gets the first down. No question. Yeah. That was just a bad read by him. But again, why is Trey Sermon in the game at that point? Mm-hmm. A couple other notes for me on this one. Like I said, Jonathan Taylor didn't play in the 2-minute drill, didn't play on many third downs as well. Goodson and Sermon combined for 27 snaps compared to only 29 for Jonathan Taylor, a game, in which Taylor looked like the best player on the field by far for Indy. Colts did have some bad drops, especially it was like late second quarter, early third quarter. I think there were 3 or 4 plays in a row. There were pretty good throws by Richardson and a couple just big time drops that killed drives. Yeah, Mitchell had a really bad one. I would be very concerned for Michael Pittman Jr. I was off of him this year, and a lot of that is tied to Anthony Richardson. I'm not going to victory lap quite yet here, but only 3 catches, had 7 targets, which I guess is okay, but really only 3 or 4 of those were even remotely catchable. And then on the Green Bay side of things, we did see Marshawn Lloyd. Saw him early in this game too. He looks like now, after being inactive in week 1, he was playing as the RB2 over Emmanuel Wilson. So it's still not somebody I'm really interested in for now in fantasy, but if Josh Jacobs were to go down at any point, I think Lloyd would be that guy in Green Bay. And then the last note I have here, Josh Jacobs, great day for him. 32 for 151. Had an ETN fumble at the goal line. Could have been an even better fantasy day. And Green Bay would have put this game away, essentially, if Jacobs doesn't cough that up at the 1-yard line.
Brutal. And it's the type, if they lose that game, we're going to be talking about that fumble a lot more. But they didn't, so we won't. We'll move on. We will talk about a game-altering terrible play shortly here by Will Levis. But first, another quick note from our friends at Fanduel. NFL kickoff is here, and Fanduel is giving away a special new user offer to RotoWire fans. Sign up and bet $5 on any Fanduel market and receive $200 in bonus bets, plus 3 free weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com or download Fanduel Sportsbook in the app. I don't know why I can't say Sportsbook. Download Fanduel Sportsbook in the App Store today to claim this offer. Will Levis, for the second week in a row, just had a mind-boggling turnover, just one you just cannot do. And it was a huge game-altering play. Tennessee's driving, about to get sacked. He throws his blind lateral at the feet of Tajay Spears. The Jets recover it, ends the drive. Not as bad as the game-winning pick 6 against the Bears last week, but Will Levis just, and Brian Callahan was losing his mind on the sideline there afterward too. Like, you just can't do that. I mean, what's going on there?
That was a 3rd and goal at the 6-yard line as well. Obviously you're getting a field goal there if you're Tennessee, and that certainly would have mattered, especially for the bettors out there. And then how did Levis respond on the next drive? Immediately threw a pick on his first play. I mean, you saw, everybody's seen the clip of Brian Callahan, using a word that I will not use on this podcast, Jeff. No. I think he's as frustrated with Will Levis as anybody. I mean, it's especially after how last week went with the mistakes that Will Levis made in that second half against Chicago. It's like, I don't know how you do that 2 weeks in a row. I mean, he has the 2 worst turnovers of the year so far, 2 weeks in. And Yeah, it feels like Tennessee could very easily be 2-0. I think we'd be talking about this team completely differently. But there's a reason that a lot of people were skeptical of Will Levis. It is plays like this. It's like Will Levis is what people think Gardner Minshew is, and
Yeah.
Minshew will make his bad turnovers, but they're not as bad as Will Levis. Don't have to spend a ton of time on this game. There wasn't a whole lot of fantasy news here. Tajay Spears was injured early in the second half. Prior to that, he had actually outsnapped Tony Pollard 20-15, but we saw a much bigger workload for Pollard with Spears on the sideline. Braylon Allen working his way
that's
into
what I
the
wanted
mix.
to bring that up.
Yeah, 20 of 57 snaps played for Braylon Allen. Goes 7 of 33 on the ground for a touchdown, 2 of 23 for another touchdown through the air. I think it was somewhat happenstance that he just kind of happened to be on the field for those 2 touchdowns. I mean, obviously great plays by Braylon Allen. Good job by Aaron Rodgers to find him. I'm not like super worried about Breece Hall. I think he's still obviously the guy here. But the Jets do have now a secondary option. Titans, I thought, did a really good job limiting Garrett Wilson. He was very quiet, especially early in this game after getting off to that hot start against San Francisco. 13 of Aaron Rodgers' 18 completions went to either Garrett Wilson, Braylon Allen, or Breece Hall. That was also the case last week. Just heavy, on that narrow tree. But we did see more Mike Williams this week. He played very limited snaps in week 1. He had a bigger role. Didn't really do much, but was on the field a lot more in week 2.
Michael Penny asks, maybe in relation to seeing Braylon Allen get those carries, trade offer. His opponent wants CeeDee Lamb for his Breece Hall. What do you think?
Obviously, it depends on your roster. Depends on who your other running backs are. If you feel okay with your other running backs, I mean, I would take CeeDee Lamb. I think that's a fair deal. I wouldn't really want to steer you too heavily one way or the other, not knowing your roster. But I know the question is that fair? Yeah, I think it's fair.
I think it's fair too. I wouldn't be reacting like, oh God, Breece Hall's losing value or anything like that. All right. A team that's better than I think expected so far is the New England Patriots. They won obviously in week 1 against the Bengals. They took the Seahawks to overtime here. They lost, but they had a lead at one point. They're looking pretty like feisty at the very least. And I think it's one of those things that every year you question your assumptions about teams in the NFL. Pats, they got the loss. They're not an exciting offensive team to watch, but they can play some defense at the very least.
They can play some defense. They can run the ball. I mean, 185 rushing yards, 5.1 yards per carry for the New England Patriots. That's what kept them in this game, because Geno Smith, looked a hell of a lot better than he did in week 1. 33 of 44 for 327 yards and a touchdown. I think you got to be really, really encouraged if you're a Jackson Smith-Njigba investor, as you know I am. 16 targets for JSN this week. 12 for 117 on those targets. DK Metcalf had the long touchdown. He goes 10 for 129. Feel great about both of those guys. Lockett, he was banged up a little bit this week, but only 2 targets from him. So that was a big reversal compared to week 1. Obviously, no Ken Walker for the Seattle Seahawks. Zach Charbonnet, he was fine. He did not look explosive whatsoever, especially relative to some of the runs Walker had last week. 19 touches for Charbonnet. None of those went for more than 9 yards, including his receptions. We did see a lot of 3 wide receiver sets from Seattle this week with Lockett, DK, and JSN all on the field for those. Each of those 3 played at least 57 of 70 snaps. I think that's particularly good news for JSN. You look at this game, I mean, it's the second week in a row that Seattle failed to cover, but in my mind, absolutely should have covered. They went out on downs deep in New England territory. They took a field goal after failing to convert another 3rd and 1 deep in New England territory. And they were driving for a touchdown in overtime, but didn't need a touchdown because they had already gotten to stop and kicked a field goal on 1st down, essentially to blow that cover. So certainly frustrating as a back-to-back Seattle bettor who has now lost both of those by the hook. And then the other note I have on New England, kind of par for the course as far as what you'd expect, but Hunter Henry, 12 targets, 8 catches for 109 yards. He was very quiet in week 1, not somebody who's going to be super sustainable, but again, if you're in tight end jail right now, that's somebody to at least look at.
Yeah, agreed. Fantasy fine for Charbonnet, but not, didn't look other because he got the score and he got the 5 catches. So PPR leagues, you ended up with like 17 points. You're like, okay, that was great. But just realize you're probably not, he's a good fill-in when you have issues. Like if you have Pacheco and, well, at least you have Charbonnet to fill in for him there. I was going to say, like the anchor and 0 running back guys are, if you got Charbonnet, if you got Mason, you're starting to get some of those things kind of falling through the cracks. If you had a desperation Braylon Allen play, that worked out, I guess, pretty well too. But yeah, that's one that kind of stands out. Caleb Williams struggled against the pass rush. I don't think it was him struggling. I was reading, he was struggling, but it was also like, not like him holding the ball forever. I read that he had like the quickest release time of the week
Yeah.
at like 2.6 seconds, something like that. So, but he had an awful fantasy day until the very end of the game. Really struggled overall.
Yeah, he struggled. I thought the Bears actually did a good job setting him up with some easy throws early in the game. They went and put a field goal on the board on their first drive, and Williams looked a lot sharper early on than he did last week against Tennessee. But yeah, as this game wore on, I think Houston found a recipe, which was, hey, if we get any amount of pressure on Caleb Williams, and he was pressured on a ton of his dropbacks, like over 60%. In this game, he's going to struggle. He took 7 sacks for 40 yards worth of losses. He had like at least 2 more that he wiggled out of and was able to get rid of the ball, but probably should have been sacked. I'm thinking of that one in the fourth quarter that probably would have been a safety where Will Anderson had 2 shots at him, and Williams did a great job to elude that. I mean, he's stronger and thicker, I think, than we give him credit for. Like, he's a really tough quarterback to bring down. I know they sacked him 7 times, but that says a lot because he's not easy to bring down. He rushed for 44 yards, like 30 of those came on one long carry late in the game. I was on Houston -6.5. Oh, just a brutal beat. All they probably needed was a field goal on that final drive.
Yeah.
And, that would have put them up 12. Cam Akers fumbles at the 3-yard line. Of course, he's only in the game because Joe Mixon is hurt. So that was horrible. A ton of penalties in this game on both sides. It was a pretty brutal watch. I mean, I think Houston ended up with 12 penalties for 115 yards, including I thought, pretty terrible call, on a roughing the passer that took a third down stop off the board late. Caleb Williams, 2 of 14 for 20 yards while pressured so far through 2 games, by the way, that according to ESPN. The Bears also have 0 running game. I think that's a big part of it, right? I mean, you don't have to respect the Bears rushing game whatsoever. That was the case in week 1. DeAndre Swift, 14 carries for 18 yards last night.
So is that on Swift, or it sounds like the offensive line is not as improved as we had hoped for?
No, it's a little bit of both, right? But I think last night, I mean, there were 4 or 5 times where Swift is just getting hammered in the backfield. I think it's more offensive line right now than it is DeAndre Swift. But that's all I really have on this game. I mean, frustrating game for Houston. Like, I thought it was just kind of a lazy game plan. They're running a lot of slants. CJ Stroud threw into a lot of contested situations. You're asking receivers to make tough catches. Nico Collins came out of it okay, but quiet day for Stephon Diggs. Really quiet day for Tank Dell, who finished with negative receiving yardage, thanks to Stephon Diggs actually blowing a block on a screen pass. But Tank Dell dropped a touchdown. They were speculating on the broadcast that maybe he lost it in the lights. It was kind of a really nice play by CJ Stroud to get out of the pocket, loft it over the middle to Tank Dell, and he just mistimed it. And I think if Tank Dell brings that in, I mean, it's going for a 60-yard score.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's, and when you get a finite number of opportunities, got to cash in on them there. Yep. Carolina Chargers.
Yes.
Yeah. Quentin Johnston. We got to talk, he emerges with his first real big game as an NFL player. But it's not a volume play. It's just the 2 scores.
Yeah, I mean, the first one was a really nice catch, I thought. Kind of a contested catch over J.C. Horn, who is allegedly a good cornerback and actually got torched last week by the Saints as well. So that was good to see for Quentin Johnston. But yeah, like you said, a little touchdown dependent. Wouldn't read too much into that. Josh Palmer was also limited by a knee injury yesterday. Didn't play much in the second half, so I think that benefited Johnston. In terms of the running game for the Chargers, we knew this would be a great spot for them. Almost a true 50-50 split for Dobbins and Edwards. Dobbins scored in another long run. He was scolded by his GM for flipping into the end zone, said no more of that. So we'll see if that carries over. Dobbins also saw both of the goal line carries for what it's worth for the Chargers. Got a little bit more out of Chuba Hubbard if you're sifting through for some positives for Carolina. Played 20 of 28 snaps on the Panthers' first 8 drives. Went 10 for 64 and 4 catches as well. But the Panthers obviously aren't doing anything on offense. Their first half drives in this game, 4 straight 3-and-outs, an interception, and then a 5-and-out. I mean, Carolina, they're as bad as we thought they were coming out of week 1. There was this trend going around. A ton of people in the Circa contest took Carolina last week, and then a ton of people took them again this week. But there was this trend out there. It's like teams that lose by 35 plus and then are an underdog of at least 4 points in their next game, they cover at about a 74% rate.
That's just numerology, though, right?
Right. A lot of people just blindly followed that. It's like you got to factor in just how inept this Carolina team is. And then my last note on this game, and then we can move on, I promise. Justin Herbert, fewest pass attempts in any game of his career in which he didn't get injured.
Yeah. Well, he kind of got injured, though, is the funny thing.
Oh, kind of, yeah. I mean, came back.
Yeah, but yeah, it didn't leave the game, obviously. But yeah, just to be aware, the thing is, you can't really start Herbert right now, but he is getting X-rays on his leg, on his lower right leg. So just beware of that. We'll see. And my God, if they have to go, at least they have Taylor Heineke now that they can kind of turn to as if they need another quarterback that couldn't completely destroy this offense's value, but there's not much value in that passing game.
No.
All right. Like you said, we're going to move on there because let's face it. So we can talk about another exciting game, Pittsburgh, Denver. Why not? Let's go.
Let's see if we can do this one in under a minute. I think this went almost exactly as most people, myself included, expected. One of my bold predictions this week is that Bo Nix would turn the ball over at least twice. I also said he would throw for under 100 yards. That didn't happen, but he had a 50-yard completion on like a trick play where he was lined up at receiver. It was kind of like almost a flea flicker type of situation. Yep. So without that, we would have been a little bit closer. He had 29 passing yards in the first half. This game, as you'd expect, was dominated by the Steelers defense. Justin Fields did throw over the middle a little bit this week. You like to see that. He had literally 0 attempts over the middle of the field last week. And Arthur Smith said that was just really because of his respect for Jesse Bates, which I thought was interesting and kind of a cool admission by him. He had a huge play, like a 50-yard completion called back to George Pickens that likely would have set up at least a field goal for Pittsburgh. I thought, the one criticism I would have of the Steelers is that they didn't chew up as much clock. Once they went up 2 scores, I thought they actually threw the ball more than they needed to in this game and weren't very efficient doing that. I thought they could have shortened the game a little bit more. They punted 6 times on 7 second-half drives.
Ugh, gross. I thought it was kind of weird that Bo Nix was like being sarcastic about being asked about his interception in the end zone. Like, you haven't earned that right yet.
No,
just don't be that guy. You made a bad pass. Try to explain what you were seeing there or something like that instead of handling it like that. All right. I have nothing else to say about that one. Denver can't run the ball, though. That's the thing.
Denver cannot run the ball whatsoever. And then my last note is that the Steelers 31-31 split in terms of snaps for Warren and Harris. Harris carried the ball 17 times compared to 9 for Warren, but we did see a lot more Jaylen Warren this week, as you would expect, with him getting a little healthier.
Exactly. Commanders, they got the win. It's not pretty, but they did get the win over the Giants, 21-18. Actually, Daniel Jones didn't turn the ball over. So there is that. Jaden Daniels gets his first win. They needed it. Both teams need that win so bad.
I don't know where the win's coming for the Giants after this. I mean, they might have to circle that November 10th game against the Carolina Panthers because it's going to be tough sledding for the Giants. We did get our Malik Neighbors breakout though. 18 targets for Malik Neighbors, goes 10 for 127 and a touchdown. Did have a big drop late as well along the sidelines, but not going to hold that against him. Wan'Dale Robinson, he had 11 or 12 targets last week. He had only 4 this week. So, kind of expected that would be the case. Daniel Jones threw 28 passes in this game and only targeted 4 players on 26 of those 28 attempts. Neighbors, Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, 3 players on 26 of those 28. So very narrow tree for the Giants. I'm sure you've seen the stat going around that the Giants became the first team ever to score at least 3 touchdowns, allow no touchdowns, and still lose a game in regulation. Part of the reason for that is their kicker got hurt on the opening kickoff.
That's right.
And they did not attempt any kicks after that. They failed on all 3 2-point conversions. They had to go for a 4th and 4 at the 22, down 3 with about 2 minutes left. I don't really understand why you don't have anybody like Daria Gubawale, for Christ's sake, was kicking field goals for the Texans last year. Like, there's nobody on your roster that you could, like your punter, he has to have at least a minimum 40% chance of hitting a 35-yard field goal. Like, what are we doing here?
Well, and it's even worse, Nick, because Gano was on the injury report going into the week.
Yes. And they still did not elevate a second kicker. I mean, just bad decision there. And again, not having even an emergency plan in place, I thought was bizarre. A couple other notes here. Jaden Daniels, more selective, I thought, as a rusher this week. He did take a huge hit to the ribs, briefly left this game. I mean, Dan Quinn came out and said last week, Jaden Daniels, he looked good on the ground. We don't want him running the ball 18 times. Daniels did take 5 sacks in this game. Austin Seibert, the kicker for the Commanders, 7 of 7 on field goals. Literally every point in this game came off a field goal. It's for the Commanders. They were 0 of 6 in the red zone. These were some situations, Jeff, that the Commanders were in. 1st and 10 at the Giants 13, 1st and 10 at the Giants 24, 1st and 10 at the 14, 1st and 10 at the 11, 1st and goal at the 8, 1st and goal at the 6, 1st and goal at the 10. None of those turned into touchdowns.
Yep. Yeah. So they got some work left to do here. Brian Robinson ran the ball well.
He was great
for 133. Daniels had 44 rushing yards. But yeah, the passing game still needs some work. I'm worried about Terry McLaurin. That one's bothering me there. maybe he'll get unleashed eventually. So hopefully that'll help there. Singletary ran well for the Giants, 16 for 95. Did lose that fumble though. That was bad.
It was very bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought Robinson looked great. That was one of my, I did a video this week on, 5 guys ready to break out. And I was like, this is such a good matchup for Brian Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
I thought pretty unlucky to not find the end zone given all of those drives that I just laid out. The red zone, they need to get that figured out in Washington. But, obviously a very, very conservative game plan for the Commanders. I think they knew what they needed to do to win this. But yeah, really encouraging for Brian Robinson. I mean, even Eckler made some plays this week. I'm kind of out on him, but I thought he looked pretty good. Terry McLaurin, he saw some volume, 6 catches on 8 targets, but I think he went for only 22 yards on those 6 catches. Just very low quality targets so far from him through 2 weeks.
Indeed. Hey, big thanks to Ironic Fate for the super chat there. Can't wait for the Steelers to fully unleash Justin Fields. We'll see if they kind of have some more design runs. I think Fields sticks as the starter, by the way, over Russell Wilson when Wilson's fully healthy.
I mean, it's hard to pull him now, right? You're 2-0. It's not like Fields has looked great, but he's been fine. He's done exactly what you've asked for of him so far. You've scored 31 points and 1 touchdown through 2 weeks. So, it's not like everything is perfect, but also 2 pretty fortuitous matchups. Obviously you caught Kirk Cousins at a bad time in week 1. Denver might be one of the 2 or 3 worst teams in the league. They get the Chargers at home this week. I mean, that is going to be a really, really fascinating game. I think two teams that want to play defensive football, that want to run the ball as much as they can. Obviously, there's a quarterback advantage there for the Chargers, but I think this will be easily the biggest test so far for Pittsburgh. Early total in that game, by the way, Jeff, is 35.5.
I guess 35 in my mind. I was just going to ask you the question because I haven't looked yet. I'm just going like Steelers minus 2.5 and 35, but we don't know about Herbert though too. So that could even drive it even lower if Herbert doesn't play. So we'll see about that. Any other parting notes before we sign off?
No, I think we did a good job, running through these. The only big picture note that I have, and this is per Rich Rebar on Twitter, through 2 weeks, and this is pending Monday Night Football, of course, but through 2 weeks so far, we have 66 total passing touchdowns. That's it, 66. Last year through 2 weeks, we had 86. 2 years ago, we had 105. In 2020, we had 110. I mean, there has been a big time depression in terms of overall receiving stats, overall passing touchdowns, and obviously that's impacting fantasy scores.
Ban the 2 deep shell. Let's go.
I don't know if it's that. I don't know if it's the shorter preseason. Not guys not being ready, but it's it feels like we're seeing more ugly football, and the numbers bear that out.
Yeah, Saints aren't paying attention to that, but everybody else is. It's kind of wild there. All right, that's going to wrap it up for today's RotoWire live stream and podcast there. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We got Jake and Joe tomorrow with free agents. As always, early waiver wire pickups tomorrow. Thanks for listening to RotoWire.